Hey there, so just hanging out with you all tonight, taking a look at the conflicts of interest that happened in Tyler Perry's Netflix movie, Mea Culpa. And so I'm not sure if you guys have all watched, but in that movie, you have Mia, who is played by Kelly Rowland, and she is a criminal defense attorney and she gets involved with an artist named Zaire, and her husband, um, her husband's brother, who is her brother-in-law, is the DA who's prosecuting the case. So she's going up against her brother-in-law in a criminal case, representing someone who a lot of people in the public think is a monster. And so, what we're going to look at first, so is the one rule that we're talking that we can discuss first, which is not a spoiler. A spoiler, everyone knows if you've been paying any attention to this movie, that in the movie, Mia sleeps with Zaire, and so she actually sleeps with her client. So let's look at how you can determine whether or not that is a violation of a lawyer's ethics and professional responsibility. And so it's easy to say, yes, obviously you should not be sleeping with your client, but why? Like, why does that rule even exist? Is there a rule? First, is there a rule? And if there is, why does it exist? And so the way to find out, first of all, is, if there's a rule, is we look at the Illinois courts ethics rules for and the reason why we looked up Illinois court site is because this movie was set and case were set in Chicago. So we look up Illinois State Bar, we find their ethics rules, and which you can see right there, and we look at these rules, and what we're going to look at is current clients' specific rules. So, this is the rule that would potentially apply to Mia and Zaire's relationship because it was her current client at the time. So, let's look at this rule. And I'm just going to say the word romantic instead of this word just because I don't want to get in trouble with YouTube or Twitch. So let's read this first. Client lawyer romantic relationships. The relationship between lawyer and client is a fiduciary one, in which the lawyer occupies the highest position of trust and confidence. The relationship is almost always unequal. Thus, a romantic relationship between lawyer and client can involve unfair exploitation of the lawyer's fiduciary role in violation of the lawyer's basic ethical obligation not to use the trust of the client to the client's disadvantage. So, what is this saying first? This is saying that a lot of times, and let's think of it even in terms of, especially in terms of a criminal case, you have an attorney who's in a position of power who almost holds its client's future. The attorney kind of does hold the client's future in their hands, and so they have this position of power um, under over the client. And so basically, what they're saying is that the client may truly trust their attorney and be potentially coerced into this romantic relationship when you have this unequal power dynamic. Um, so that's interesting that you have, you better listen to me or you're going to listen to me. Um, you know, I have your future in my hands, and that could exploit the trust between a client and their attorney. So that's the first piece of this. The second piece, if we look at, right, so don't use the client's trust to the client's disadvantage. Hmm, we would, in this case, in Mea Culpa in this movie, did it seem like there was any sort of coercion or unequal power distribution that led to that relationship? Probably not. So I would say that this piece probably doesn't apply. Um, but the fact that it is a violation of your basic ethical obligation, right? There's that possibility that that you're abusing the trust of your client. You would not take that. Once you do have relations with that person, you have to split ties, um, because the conflict then is present, and it would have to be disclosed according to these rules. Let's go to the next sentence. In addition, such a relationship presents a significant danger that, because of the lawyer's emotional involvement, the lawyer will be unable to represent the client without impairment of the exercise of independent professional judgment. So, what is this trying to say, right? It's trying to say that a romantic relationship between a lawyer and its client could cause the lawyer to be emotionally involved to a point where they would not be able to exercise their independent professional judgment. Their feelings could get in the way. And it's not even saying that your feelings will get in the way, it's saying that the relationship presents a significant danger that your feelings will get in the way of you being able to represent your client independently and professionally. And again, since you have that duty to fully, independently, professionally, rationally represent your client to the best of your ability, when you start to have a romantic relationship with your client, there's a possibility that you can no longer represent them to the best of your ability. And as an attorney with a client, if that possibility exists and you are acting in your client's best interest, you're going to want to get rid of even that possibility, which means, again, you recuse yourself from the case. You file a motion to, I don't know, recuse. I'm not a criminal lawyer, but you don't represent that client once that conflict arises. Moreover, let's look at the next sentence. Moreover, a blurred line between the professional and personal relationships may make it difficult to predict to what extent client confidences will be protected by the attorney-client privilege, since client confidences are protected by privilege only when they are imparted in the context of the client-lawyer relationship. Ooh, I have one person watching. Hello. Thanks so much for. If you have any questions, please type them in. So let's look at this piece. This is basically saying that in general, when you are consulting with your attorney in the context of an attorney client relationship, so you are meeting with your attorney to talk about your case, you are preparing for um, cross examination, anything that you say to your attorney is covered by attorney client privilege, which means that it can't be used as evidence in the case. Your attorney doesn't have to disclose to the other side that you made a certain statement or asked a certain question that could be used against you. And so you have sort of that black and white. You are my attorney. I'm talking to you because I'm seeking legal advice. I want your representation. And when I say these things to you in this context, you're not going to have to disclose them. You're not going to be able to repeat them. This is confidential between us and our attorney-client relationship. Now, when you enter into the romantic world, you can blur that line. So, is this conversation that we're having at this moment and these statements that I'm making to you right now, are they in the context of our romantic relationship or are they in the context of our professional attorney client relationship? And obviously, there's a really low risk that you would say something to your attorney if you have this romantic relationship when you're potentially in a romantic moment or something like that. But just theoretically, the chance that that exists, that chance is there that you make a statement to the person who is your attorney is representing you, and it's a statement that's not made in the context of that relationship, that totally could be used against you in evidence. And so, again, this is something that is the attorney's duty, right? We say this potential for you to be at a disadvantage because there's this blurred line there now of when we're talking, whether or not we're talking as boyfriend, girlfriend, or romantic partners, or whether or not we're talking as attorney or client, just because that potential for damage to the client even exists at that point, that's when you as an attorney say, "No, there's a potential for a conflict here. I'm going to, have to turn your case over to someone else. I can't represent you anymore because I want to act in your best interests and protect you. And because there's that chance that some of the statements you make to me could actually be admitted as evidence, we're going to end this attorney-client relationship now, so there's no more blurred lines." So let's look at the next sentence here. Because of the significant danger of harm to client interests and because the client's own emotional involvement renders it unlikely that the client could give adequate informed consent, this rule prohibits the lawyer from having romantic relations with a client, regardless of whether the relationship is consensual and regardless of the absence of prejudice. Client. Um, Basically, this is almost saying that because the relationship exists and there are now emotions involved, you could not sort of make this romantic relationship okay by saying that your client has consented to it. It's very, and I hate to say it, but it's very similar to sort of statutory R cases where you say that so too young to be able to consent. This is basically saying that we know that there's this emotional involvement that's present, and you also have this person who potentially has your life in their hands. So we have determined that according to our rules that govern the conduct of attorneys, you, client, cannot give consent and say that this is a um, consensual relationship. So, black and white, no, there's no consent here, and we can't say that Zaire consented to this relationship. And that would potentially make it okay. It wouldn't. He cannot consent according to these rules. Okay, so this didn't apply here, but we can talk about that. This relationships that predate the client lawyer relationship are not prohibited. So this is basically saying that if the relationship has ended prior to the start of the client lawyer relationship, then you no longer have that power dynamic. You no longer have um, the emotional involvement, which is questionable to me, right? Just because you stop having romantic relations, in my opinion, doesn't necessarily mean that this part, which is supposed to be a concern to the Illinois State Bar, the emotional involvement and lawyer not being able to represent the client without impairment of the exercise of independent professional judgment. I wouldn't take the case, even if the well, I would say this, the closer the end date of the romantic relationship to the start date of the attorney client relationship, I think would really, at least in my mind, play a big role here. Right. So if on Monday you were in a relationship and Tuesday you broke up and Wednesday you started your client lawyer relationship, please tell me how the concerns about emotional involvement and impairment of the exercise of independent professional judgment is gone. Like, I don't see a bright line there. Apparently there is a difference, according to the Illinois State Bar. But there's also this note here that says, however, before proceeding with the representation in these circumstances, the lawyer should consider whether the lawyer's ability to represent the client will be materially limited by the relationship. So this is basically giving the attorney the opportunity to consider whether or not they think that they can represent their client to the best of their ability. So it's giving the lawyer the call. Interesting. When the client is an organization. Okay, so this is basically saying if you're representing a business, you can't have a romantic relationship with someone in the business who actually supervises, directs, or regularly consults with you. But if you're involved with someone who's in the business who is not directly interacting with you, there doesn't seem to be a conflict. So thanks for going over this with me. I was just going to take a look at this particular rule really quickly and hope to see you soon. Thanks. Bye.